It all started with an email.
Steve, you might want to see this. Hey man, about that story you wrote last week, this dude is claiming it on his channel. 0 credit, 0 source links. Might want to send a claim before it gets too big.
Even as a writer, I can't begin to appropriately describe the rage I felt as I clicked on that YouTube link. There it was, right in front of my eyes. My story. My breakthrough story at that. 9 minutes and 38 seconds of his voice pretending that he was the mastermind behind the story that took the internet by storm for weeks. News channels talked about it, Snoops debunked it, cities released statements trying to kill the small bits of hysteria it created. This was huge, maybe even bigger than Slenderman. And then there was this guy, acting like it was his idea, his creation, his baby. YouTube is interesting in its copyright process. If you feel that your intellectual property has been stolen, you can file a DMCA claim against the owner of the channel the video was uploaded to. After a small appeals process, YouTube will decide either in favor of the channel owner or the creator of the original content. It doesn't always go the way it should, and lots of content creators get screwed by ruthless YouTube personalities looking for a quick way to gain lots of views. I was one of the unlucky ones. Insufficient proof was the reason cited for the denial of my claim. To be honest, I couldn't be mad about that. I spent weeks leading up to the release of my story, figuring out how to remain anonymous for immersion purposes. I wanted the reaction that the story garnered, and, unfortunately, this was the consequence of that. I never wanted the fame or attention. But after that denial, I decided to go ahead and sacrifice my anonymity for the sake of shutting this guy down. In the email, I made a point of letting him know that if he were to relinquish that he did not create the story, he would be the first and only person to know where the story originated. With that information, he would probably get tons of attention for being the only person to know the origin. And I made it clear that I wouldn't argue anything he wanted to tell the media about how he found me. It seemed like a good trade-off. I'd get him to confess, he would get his attention. Win-win. No response. 2 days later, I sent the same email again. Nothing. The following week or so became an obsession with me contacting him. I sent numerous emails per day. I created fake names and emails to inquire about the story. I started sending him handwritten fan mail to the P.O. Box address he had listed on his website. Still, all I received was silence. But he was very much active online. I was being blatantly ignored. Funny thing about being ignored, it fosters anger. Anger births resentment. Resentment develops hatred. Hatred creates ideas. P.O. boxes have to be tied to a legal name. As luck would have it, this fine young fellow was using his real name as his YouTube personality name. It wasn't hard at all to trace him down to an exact region in Arkansas. Luck was on my side again, as I had plenty of vacation time saved up. After arriving in his city, I spent a few days doing some reconnaissance to find him and learn his routines, which was way easier than I had initially thought. He was your typical struggling artist type who would spend his days sitting in a hipster coffee shop on his netbook instead of looking for a job. No exaggeration here, I followed him for 4 days. That's what he did every single day. Around dinner time, he would retreat home to his parents' house and spend the rest of the night in his room working on his videos. Snatching him up was a cakewalk. He took a long, isolated road to the lovely indie coffee shop by means of bicycle. I simply ran him off the road and tossed him into the covered bed of my rental truck. At some point, I recall feeling bad for doing this to someone who clearly had the mental capacity of a dried clam. In my rage and meticulous preparations, I had found a wonderful lonesome spot in the middle of the woods that was at least a mile away from civilization in every direction. In that place, I dug a deep, narrow hole and placed some supplies inside of a tree. That's the situation this YouTube sensation woke up in, buried up to the neck with a plethora of tools in his sight. The rush of emotions trying to properly express themselves on his face was borderline orgasmic to watch. He screamed, he cried, he begged, all while I sat there in silence and observed with a smug smile. In my mind, I was kicking myself for not wearing a clown mask for shits and giggles. Maybe 20 or 30 minutes had passed before I decided to say something to the thief. I hadn't prepared a grand speech nor a vengeful verbal assault. My plan was more in the actions than in the enlightenments.
You stole my story, among others. You messed up. Fortunately for you, I'm the only one willing to act on it.
He started crying and squirming harder than before, probably with the realization of what he'd done finally setting in. I grabbed a pair of scissors I brought with me and held them up to his face. Then I stood up, grabbed his stupid curly ponytail mane and cut it down to size. Honestly, that was more of a petty thing, but I have no regrets. After he had a brief moment of relief, I returned to his front and held the scissors to his face again. Once he resumed crying, I began laughing.
It's just a prank, bro. Mikey put me up to this,
I said as I gave him a rub on the head. He seemed relieved and chuckled a bit between sobs.
Just kidding. I don't know Mikey.
With those words, I cut each side of his nostrils about halfway up with the scissors.
There's a list of credentials you're going to add to that clown video in your pocket. You have a day. If you go to the police, I'll come back,
I said, as I slathered hand sanitizer on my hands in a poor effort to clean up. It wasn't working as well as I had hoped, so I squeezed out the rest of the bottle onto the bridge of his nose. I left before it ran down to his nostrils, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't pause when the shrieking started. He altered the video a bit later than I had given him, but I decided to chalk it up to the difficulty of getting out of the hole. I will admit, I have grave concerns about the police coming to arrest me. I fully intend on going back if I get the slightest inclination that he talked, but I'm still concerned nonetheless. I guess only time will tell.